All right, we're live. Naam, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. To our distinguished guests, well, actually to our esteemed audience, we're back again, episode 3 with the Fajr Club. This is your one of your co-hosts, or one of your hosts, Nafis Abu Zaid, with my other co-host.
This is your brother Aqil Ingram.
And this is your brother Abdul Haq Baker.
Nah, Dr. Abdul Haq Baker. MashaAllah. Also, I just want to give a small reminder before we start. For all our brothers and sisters that's coming down with the flu or falling ill with the COVID, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant y'all speedy recovery and, inshallah ta'ala, aid y'all in this time, because I know there are a lot of people who have lost loved ones or someone to this tremendous virus in this pandemic, inshallah ta'ala.
At this point, everyone knows someone who's been impacted.
Nah. I came down sick. So you guys don't know I'm kind of sick right now, but I came down sick the other day, was really feeling it. So, inshallah. Tayyip. Any one of y'all want to start off? Y'all can, inshallah ta'ala.
I'd like to, if that's okay, since I was the latecomer last week, and mashallah, forgive me for that again. Very good and engaging conversation I jumped into with you two dear brothers, mashallah. And again, I want to thank the brothers and sisters who are on the various platforms that have been established, continuing the discussion. It's really thought-provoking. The sisters have shared their experiences of when they converted, the communities and everything. Really amazing content and narratives that show that the Fajr Club is something that's required, if not needed, mashallah. But today we're talking about the perspective of the Muslim convert. How do they begin? How do they begin to traverse being a new convert? Many times we start the discussion with what they need to do, okay? What they need to prepare for. And that's all well and good. But one of the things that communities don't do, and alhamdulillah, we've been discussing it around the framework that I established and modified from my research and everything, we've got to look at where they are at, where they are coming from. And that's from a community perspective. Because usually the one joining a crowd, whether it's Muslim or not, one joining a fraternity has to embrace that culture. But there's no consideration of what they're bringing to that community, to that culture. And I'm thinking in mind now as well of the hadith from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The best of you was he who was the best in Jahiliyyah. Okay. Yeah. Now, if we think about that, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is not saying you're coming into the deen, so you should be like this. He's saying the best of you. He's referring to a trait or traits or characteristics of when they were not Muslim. So it shows that there's an outward looking perspective from within the community at those individuals coming in. Oftentimes that's been neglected, ignored completely, and there are expectations that those individuals who are coming in have to embrace everything, and we don't have to concern ourselves with him or her or what they're bringing to the table. And this is a very significant disconnect, because then we find individuals leaving the community, having conflict in the community, leaving the deen even, because the understanding they had, that the deen caters for them and is all encompassing, very little, if any, encompassing has taken place at all. And before I hand over to you, there's things I want to throw into this particular discussion that we should look at. And again, from my studies, I'm referring to, and I've applied it. Let's look at two constructs that we may have had ourselves, or we would have experienced prior to Islam, and also within Islam. And I'm talking about a societal context. So in society, all societies, particularly democratic societies, there's an element and degree of social control. The government puts in measures and facilitates the general populace with particular policies, particular practices, particular beliefs that they expect society to embrace or engage, or it's something that the majority have voted for or subscribed to. Okay, so through those stages of social control, we have state actors. They attempt to identify compatible elements for society, and their expectation, the government's expectation, the state's expectation, is that you will have law-abiding citizens. We know this phrase, law-abiding citizens. In other words, they have legitimized identities. They have identities that are considered legitimate. Why is there all the shootings and oppression against us as black people in America and in the UK? Why are we facing some of the challenges that we're facing? Because they see us as a threat and do not hold our culture and our characteristics to be legitimate, because we don't subscribe to absolutely everything of white America, white Britain, white imperialism. So they see us having and possessing more elements of delegitimized identities, hence the treatment that they're giving us now. So I'm going to stop shortly. I want you to really absorb what I'm saying here. So the legitimized identity is there of law-abiding citizens who have subscribed to the society's social control apparatus, the policies, the government legislation, everything that is being given to them, they vote for, but the government is giving them, and they have this social contract that because you are giving us all of this, we will be law-abiding. We will have that identity that you require from us. Now, there are those who buck the trend because they don't subscribe to everything that the state government gives, because they see it as oppressive, they see it as duplicitous for whatever reasons. And we can name famous individuals in history, in American history, UK history, from the black communities, who stood up and resisted what was being done, saying this is not legitimized identity, this is oppression. You're only catering for a particular ethnicity. You are oppressing and marginalizing other ethnicities. Malcolm X was one such person. We have many today who are saying that. So those individuals, and it's amongst the grassroots as well, we were like this, I was like that. We had an element of deviance, not Islamic now, we're not talking about bid'ah, we had deviance from that social controlling norm, because it did not cater for us, it oppressed us. So what did we have? Instead of that legitimized law-abiding identity, we had resistance identities. We had resistance identities where we rejected the status quo. That doesn't mean that we're opposite to law-abiding, that we're criminal. No, but we resisted what was called and what continues to be called the status quo, because it does not accommodate us. Now, putting it over to you two, what am I saying here? Those are just two constructs I've given. There are two more that I've looked at and researched, but we won't touch upon those at the moment. That can be for another time. A number of us, this is a question now. When we embraced Islam, did we embrace Islam because of our rejection of the social control that government had put upon us and what we'd seen happening amongst our communities? And even if it wasn't amongst our communities, that it was the injustice that we'd witnessed within the wider society, using religion, using politics, using whatever. And therefore, by default, we had resistance identities. And that made it more conducive for us to embrace Islam, knowing that Islam superseded, it was overarching of all man-made structures. It did not limit us to a social control of a particular society. Did we embrace Islam with these resistance identities? Do converts embrace Islam with these resistant identities? I would offer and suggest that we do, because we're rejecting a status quo that we deem to be corrupt, that we deem to be imperfect, that we deem to be incompatible with spiritual aspects of which we have been seeking and have been guided to in Islam. I throw that to you. Big things I'm throwing there now, but it's always in the context of looking outwardly the best of you in the deen is the one who was the best of you in Jahiliyyah, looking outwardly at who's coming in, what they're coming in with, and how we are accommodating them.
Okay. You raise several strong points. I have a few thoughts here, maybe even four. Before I mention my thoughts, I want to answer the question that you posed. I'll speak about my personal experience first, and then I'll go into my thoughts. Myself, I embraced Islam kind of young. I was about 13 years old or so when I embraced the faith. And what I'm about to say, I say this as a person that was raised as a Black nationalist. That was my upbringing. I was raised as a Black nationalist, Second Baptist Christian, even though that's a bit of an oxymoron, but that's how I was raised. Not as a Pan-African, but as a Black nationalist. All that being stated, though, my own personal experience in embracing the faith, it was highly centered on spirituality and one's relationship with God. And I came into a conflict at the ages of 10 and 11 years old with regard to the Christian narrative, and in seeking solutions for that, starting with reading the entire Bible and such and working through. By the age of 13, I found the spiritual connection I needed in Islam. But for me at that age, that was a separate issue from Black nationalism that I was raised on, right, myself, right? But nevertheless, I don't think that is the majority case for most people, to your point. And as you're stating, the prophetic tradition, the best of them before Islam are the best of them in Islam, provided that they have understanding, comprehension of our faith. I think this speaks to the fact that non-Muslims have value, and we don't always state that as such because of our own theological rearing and at times dogmatic rearing, but that nevertheless is a reality. And this is even further supported, I would submit, by another prophetic tradition that comes in the Sahih of Muslim, where in this prophetic tradition, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, may commendation and salutation bestowed upon him, he mentions that Allah rewards non-Muslims for their good deeds in this life. However, they will not have a portion of the hereafter. So this prophetic tradition as well, it speaks to the fact that non-Muslims have value, and our Lord acknowledges the value that they do have and then rewards them for that, right? So indeed, there is value that non-Muslims have that they carry with them into the faith of Islam. That's my point number one. Point number two, to your point, we absolutely should meet people where they are when they embrace the faith, as opposed to dumping a systematic, dogmatic construct on them as soon as they enter. And I think there's benefit in this. Of course, the person that has embraced the faith benefits the most from someone or someone's meeting them where they are in their life experiences and their spiritual journey. But I would also add to this, to your point, Dr. Baker, I think the community benefits from this greatly as well. Because when we meet people where they are, we learn about their values. And as we learn about their values, we learn about their value add to our communities and to society, right? So I believe that definitely is the case, and it should be done, and it's a better approach to do it that way. I would also mention to your finalizing points, when we look to resistance culture, I would think and I would say that it is untoward and it is unbecoming of the one who is suppressed or oppressed to go to the suppressor, to go to the oppressor, and then ask permission to become an equal and then expect to be given that. That is not quite how that works. Right. Again, it's a discussion of value. You even by your going to ask permission to be made an equal, you are acknowledging that you're lesser than and you're not an equal, right? The
Right.
way power works, power has to be taken. You don't ask, right? You establish and you take it, right? And you do that based upon the value that you have and that you express.
No, barakallahu feek. Um, that was beautiful. Well put, brother Akil. I don't really have too much to put towards your points besides the fact of my own personal experience going through a lot of some of the. I wasn't a black nationalist, but I did go through a lot of the rhetoric, especially with the Elijah Muhammad movement a little bit. Some of the different things, the message of the black man, his projection, his outlook towards the white man, some of the different, books I read of different slaves and stuff like that and what they went through. But that wasn't really my reason to come into Islam. My reason to come into Islam really had been all more so about spirituality for me. It's just been about connecting to the Creator. And what it done for me was able to put a good spin on how to deal with a society that might be suppressive or oppressive. It allows me to be able to function within that society to realize that no, you are a servant of the Creator. You know what I mean? He's the one really in control. And even though you find yourself in these circumstances, you know what I'm saying, if you obey him, then you'll pretty much be okay. You can't control what you don't have control of. And that's sort of what did the thing for me. So I was more happy of trying to transform myself far as a spiritual being. That's you know what I mean, that's pretty much I can speak to your points far as
Can-
myself.
And
Yeah.
I think it's excellent that you both said that, because you've answered the question. And I think the similar thing I would say to you was about the spirituality, Tawheed. I was a Roman Catholic before. I've stopped practicing everything. But again, I come back now because you've answered my question. All of us are going to be in this construct. By default, within that binary paradigm that I've given, we therefore came onto the deen with resistance identities. Maybe not from our perspective, but from a societal perspective looking at us. Why? Because when we embraced Islam, just like those, similar to those, the Sahaba at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, when Islam was becoming more prominent, what happened in the treatment of the Sahaba, the fledgling community? How did the Quraysh view them? We've got the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. We've seen how they were treated. We've seen how they were ostracized. We've seen how they were a threat. They became more of a threat as they grew, and the message and the revelation became more prevalent, more constant, more dominant in that instance there. So what they were doing by embracing the religion, we may not have seen ourselves that this is resistant identity. Okay, we may have seen, well, okay, spiritually, Tawheed, the Sunnah, this is the way I want to go. But now we've got to take and look from another perspective, an overarching society perspective. Brother Aqil, from a family perspective, how your family, that unit, may have viewed you. Okay, so the viewing would have been, he's moving away from a legitimization of our culture, our faith, our being. The same with you, Brother Nafis. You moving away from something and moving towards Islam, same with me. We didn't see it as I've just described, but now we must look at it. How were they looking at it? And they could not look at it, when we're looking at this binary construct at the moment, at anything other than they're moving away from something established, something that everyone knows about, and they're moving into something that, even though it's known, Islam is known, within our context, within our cultural, religious, community, societal context, they're moving from this law abiding, and maybe law abiding isn't the right phraseology to use, so I'll stick with, they're moving from that legitimized, identifiable, palatable, acceptable construct to one which is a deviation from that, and that's Islam. Now, that's how we were being viewed, and some of the resistance you and I may have received, and what other converts will invariably have received to varying degrees, because it's breaking away from a norm. Okay, but now from our perspective, some of us may have said, yes, we're coming spiritually and everything, but there was a rejection of the wider society, the faith that was the predominant one, if it was Christianity in the West, as we know it, and a rejection of what society says in part or on the whole, is acceptable. Now, we're not talking about anarchy here, but we're saying everything we're being fed is not the truth. Everything we're being fed is not good for us. As we know, don't believe the hype. So in embracing Islam, there is that element of a resistance identity forming, but not a resistance identity to the deen, because as we've spoken in the previous sessions, we have to embrace the religion completely, total submission, being slaves of Allah. So while we have that resistance looking out to a man-made construct, being the society, as we're looking inward to the religion, it's complete submission to a degree that we have never submitted to anything or anyone ever before. So this is an important thing to make. So these are binary constructs at the moment. As I said, they are not the only constructs that are there. But we need to look and see, because I've had it. I'll give an example. As chairman of Brixton Mosque, we had individuals coming into the mosque at one stage, and we asked them, why do they want to become Muslim? And in some instances, they had individuals who were Muslim. There's a Muslim gang, they used to call themselves Muslim boys, waiting on the high road to say, if you don't come back out as a Muslim, we're going to kill you. And it happened. One of the brothers, I won't mention his name, from our community, it was a big thing. You could Google it in the news and everything. Many years, 2005, this happened. His brother was in a confrontation, and his brother was a bit of, as we say, a roadman, a bit of a gangster, like many of the individuals embraced in our community. And these Muslims said to him, they didn't come to our mosque, we didn't know them, but they said, if you don't become a Muslim, like your brother, we're going to kill you. And he rejected. They shot him in his face, point blank, 5 times. Now, you know Brixton, South London, okay? The non-Muslim community were ready to run riot with us, but we'd had serious confrontations with them before. And I don't want to go into details. You're from America, and we know what happens there, but it was on a similar scale. The threats, the level of violence, everything like that. But what we had to do was go immediately into the community and say, this is not from us. This is not from us. On other occasions, when individuals came running into the mosque, they were coming in for fear of other Muslims who were going to threaten them with their lives and everything. So we saw this construct here that, okay, there's no compulsion in religion, la ikra fi din. So we then had to look inwardly and address the Muslims. They weren't coming to the mosque. Some were going into ruku, guns dropping out in prayer and everything, and saying, no. This is not what this place is about. This is not the understanding of the deen. And we had to go through that process to the extent we said to them, if this is the Islam that you're practicing, they weren't takfiri, became takfiri, but they were on this is what we're doing. Muslim is predominant. We rob drug dealers. We do such and such. They were doing all of that in the distorted name of Islam. So some individuals were coming to the deen out of fear because of knowing what the consequences would be then. That was a total distortion and had nothing to do with the construct that I'm speaking about now. But why am I raising this? We need to embrace and engage and take time with individuals, brothers and sisters who are coming into the deen. Okay, we know in the Medinian society, when the Sahaba, the Quraysh moved across in the initial stages, the Prophet ﷺ paired them with some of the Ansar. We have some beautiful stories of that. We don't even attempt to do that today. What happens in the masajid? I remember when I came to Brooklyn, 1993, and I was going on a conference. Sheikh Sahib was there. This is when Ali Tamimi, and there wasn't controversy around him and everything. And I stopped in Brooklyn for a Jummah. And an individual, they made a big song and dance, literally, metaphorically speaking. Individual took Shahada after Jummah in Imam Sawaj Rahad's mosque. Beautiful atmosphere amongst the brothers and everything. And they did this big thing, him standing there like a cat caught a deer or a cat caught before the headlights, did his Shahada. Like in the UK, after that, where was the infrastructure? Where was the network? Where was someone appointed to help this individual and be in contact? I'm not saying that didn't happen, but I was asking that because I know in our communities, similar happened. So if we don't know or take time to understand this individual, whether we don't accept it or not, by him or her embracing Islam from a societal perspective, these individuals have adopted an identity of deviance from the norm. So we need to embrace them. We need to encompass them. We need to go to, and that doesn't mean 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. We need to befriend them. And we need to make the sacrifices, or close to the sacrifices, that we saw made when the Quraysh moved to Medina and they were paired up with Ansar.
Yeah, and well, the first thing I have to say this. You know that you have absolutely dated yourself by saying don't believe the hype. Huh?
I know.
But maybe I dated myself too because I know what that is, right? Well, I would share this. Just to your point that we have those same things here. I can recall maybe close to 15 years ago now in South Jersey. And I'll say it this way. One of the larger private fraternities that we have in our country that operates in the underworld in our neighborhoods and cities. There was a coalescing, as it were. It was odd, but there was a crossing of that particular fraternity with Muslims, with new Muslims embracing Islam. And this is different from the private fraternity I made mention of last week. And to your point, as a part of their code, they were looking at some of the infrastructure they can find or they could find in an Islamic governmental system, and they were looking to overlay that upon their private fraternity. So then they would send their people to the masjid to become Muslim and send them to some of our classes, right? In order to learn some of our teachings, but not just for the sake of spirituality and theology. They were looking at it from the standpoint of methodology and looking to apply those methods to their private fraternity, you know? So we had that and everything that came with it, the criminal behavior and such that came along with that, and those things that started kind of circling around our communities because of that crossover, right? But what I want to mention, though, I think that we should mention is even though this is a reality that comes along with resistance culture, and many people who embrace Islam either are still within resistance culture or they're being seen as a part of resistance culture, so they are treated as they are. We should mention that just by the nature of Islam itself, in its structure, in its lifestyle, in its spirituality, in its theology, there is an organic de-radicalization process that does take place when a person goes through the proper rearing of the faith, right? And even myself, being raised as a Black nationalist, right, in my early upbringing, coming into Islam, it brings about a greater appreciation for diversity and for the value that other cultures and subcultures that they add, different worldviews, world perspective, life experiences, right? If we all are in this experience of life together and we're having differing experiences, there's no one of us that can have all experience. So there's benefit in us crossing over our experiences, and that does come by way of diversity, right? So Islam is something that definitely brings these types of values to the forefront. Along with this, though, and to your point about society perceiving individuals that may embrace the faith of Islam as being a part of resistance culture, it's very common. I can say definitely after 2001, right? Definitely after 2001, it became commonplace in those early years for people. It's happened to me in a grocery store, out in the street. Go back to your country, and you're perceived as the other, even though you're just as American or just as British as a person that's speaking to you, right? Also, there was an influx of many people, more people embracing Islam after 2001 than prior to 2001. And I think everybody, witnessed that and experienced that as well. But we also had a large influx of European American Muslims, right? We colloquially would say whites embracing the faith. But what was interesting was that in their experience, in their challenges, for many of our brothers and sisters that I've spoken to, in their operating in a society where white privilege does exist, they began to be perceived as traitors to
Right.
their own people inside of their own culture. So
Right.
they now became a part of this perceived resistance culture as well, right?
Yes.
So it wasn't just a one ethnicity thing. It's kind of an across the board thing when one embraces the faith of Islam.
Absolutely.
As far as I want to mention this because I know pretty much we're coming at this from a different angle from a brother Dr. Abdul Haq Baker. He was coming at it from another angle, but I do want to mention this because I think it is really important. What should be the next step for the new Muslim? And I know a lot of people say that there's really the infrastructure, but Islam already has the infrastructure. It already has the whole system laid in play. It does. And I want to mention this so that the new Muslim will know what's taking place. Allah Jalla wa Ala, He mentioned in the Quran that there is a transformation taking place with Islam. No matter who you are, no matter what status you've been in life, no matter if you was a chieftain, no matter if you was, higher up in the status, on the totem pole, it doesn't matter. Or if you was lowly, you still was undergoing a transformation. Henceforth, Allah Jalla wa Ala makes it clear when He says, Kitabun anzalnahu ilayka litukhrija an-nas min adh-dhulumati ila an-nur, right? Allahu waliyyu alladhina amanu yukhrijuhum min adh-dhulumati ila an-nur. Al-ayat. What I'm basically saying is Allah Jalla wa Ala mentioned in both of these verses telling us that's what? A book which He had revealed unto you, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in order to take the people from out of darkness and bring them into light. That's a transformation. In other words, they was lost before they came into the spirituality. They was lost before they came into this message. They was lost before they came into Islam, right? That's being understood. Allah saying Allah is the protector of those who believe, bringing them forth from out of darkness into light. Allah Jalla wa Ala tells us about Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, His mission and sending him. Huwa alladhi ba'atha fil ummiyina rasulan minhum yatlu ayatihi, right? وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَإِنْ كَانُوا مِنْ قَبْلُ لَفِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ. Allah Jalla wa Ala reiterating this again, that He is the one who sent from amongst the illiterate Arabs a messenger from amongst themselves, who frightened to them His verses. But to do what? To purify them. So in other words, it has served as a purifier as well, and to teach them the book, and to teach them the hikmah, which is the sunnah, right? Because before that, they was in utter loss, right? So why is I'm bringing all of this? The new Shahada should know that at the stage that they at, no matter their social standing, the social construct, whatever stage they're at, they are in a state of loss, and they feel that. So when they gravitate towards Islam, they know that they're looking for something else. They're looking for something. I know me, I was looking for something when I accepted Islam. So I know they're looking for something. So they're looking for this transformation to take place. But how does it take place? Well, to me, the next quest for any person who accepts Islam, they should be looking at those things that have been laid out in the Hadith of Jibril. Even if they didn't know it, this is for the people who does know, that explains that what you should know about Islam. If you look at the questions that Jibril asked the Prophet, it was laid out clear. He did a whole stage now. Okay, so inform me, what is about Islam? So we start at the first level of the deen. Islam, what is Islam about? We explain to them what is Islam about, right? The Shahada, etc., etc., etc. What is Iman? He explains what Iman is about, right? They should learn that. And I think that responsibility still starts with the new Shahada, not with the masjid. You understand what I'm saying?
Good point. Yeah,
that starts with the new Shahada.
Now, I think beautiful that you brought that at this stage, brother Nafis, because that's the essence of what we're discussing. Why have I bought all what I bought now? Because in order for a flower to grow, the conditions have to be right. The soil has to be fertile. It has to be the right climate. And it has to be fed and watered in the right doses. Not drowning it, not starving it. If that environment is not conducive for everything you've said then that new Shahada who's coming in with an understanding that he or she has to learn those responsibilities can end up learning them in a distorted context because the environment is not conducive. Part of the environment not being conducive is the environment, the community, not understanding that they're going to have a multiplicity of personalities and dynamics that are coming into them. And also for that individual, that new Muslim, they need to be able to reconcile what is happening to them, how they're being perceived from where they're leaving, or the macro context that they're living in, and from those who are receiving them. Why do I say that? Because we've seen individuals embrace the deen, and we talked about my 4 stages cognitive theoretical framework, and we've seen that those who have got them at the first founding stage, which we're still at, that we're discussing, have delivered to them a distorted understanding at this very vulnerable stage of Islam. It's either been politicized, it's either been tapping into that knowledge that they are being perceived as having deviance, having left a wider society, a resistance identity. Some of them tapping into that resistance identity and saying this is equality, which it is if you're embracing Islam upon Tawheed and the correct understanding, as Brother Aqil had said. But where it can become problematic, as we've seen, where that resistance identity, part of that was criminality before Islam, violence, theft, robbery, criminality at all levels, and then meeting individuals who receive them, again, the environment is unconducive, saying to them, this is meritorious, this resistance identity is meritorious in the deen, you get rewarded because now you are kicking back against the kuffar, you can rob, you can steal the things you were doing, you can take what your right hand possessed, that girlfriend can be your right hand possessed, and then we see a radicalization because they've tapped into that resistance identity, acknowledged it, and said, you can continue to use that in the deen. So it's important that the individuals, yes, they need to know these foundations. They need to learn these foundations, but they've got to come into an environment that is conducive to that learning.
Hold on, Brother Aqil. But think about it. Everything you pretty much saying, the companions went through it. You kept mentioning it earlier. The companions went through resistance from their own family members. They went through resistance from the Quraysh. They went through all these different resistance. Yeah, some companions' mothers say, I wouldn't even eat. Vow that I wouldn't even eat unless you forsaken the religion that Muhammad sallallahu that you profess to be in. You have different companions who went through a lot of different, tribulations or
that's external. That's right? The macro. What I'm saying, what when they came into the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abu Bakr, Ali, they came in. Obviously, the revelation was coming down. They came into a conducive environment that protected and equipped them to be able to learn conducively. So I'm not talking about the external now. I'm talking about what they're coming into.
So pay attention though. If that was the case though, listen what you're saying. The Prophet will still be here. You don't need the Prophet to still be here.
No.
The message is still intact. If the message is still intact, right, and everything is still intact with it, it's still a conducive environment. Islam is still a conducive environment. I understand what you're talking about in terms of how it's being disseminated to them, how they're actually, receiving it for those who are actually teaching them. I get that part. But what I'm trying to get you to understand is don't remove some of the responsibility from the individual.
No, right? I accept
some of them. Yeah. And don't, also trying to say, don't stretch it so much to think that just because they come into a resistant society or so forth like that, that this is the case, right? Because you're going to have some people who have evil in their hearts.
Yes.
Anyway, people who are basically upon criminology don't want to give it up. They don't want to leave the darkness that we was talking about, to move to the light. They know Islam does not promote it. Right. Even if they didn't know all the things about Islam commanded or prohibited, they know Islam does not promote it, right? And this is why you have to go back to that issue I was talking about before, Masjid Darar. Understand that they actually built that masjid based upon corruption. Allah subhanahu exposed them. You see what I'm saying? Yes. So you're going to have people like that. That was during the time the Prophet was alive. That was during the time of the Prophet. You're going to have people who want to come along, like you said, you don't want to take a shahada, we're going to kill you. If you don't become Muslim, we're going to kill you. And like our brother Aqil was mentioned about the fraternity, different gangs, Muslim gangs, right? And there's a lot of them, and I think it was in Trenton as well. I forgot what they was called, the Abdullahs. Yeah, it was called the Abdullahs, and then you had the Abdul Salams.
The Abdullahs and the Salams. That was
the Salams.
During this time,
Yeah, so you have a lot of different gangs, but they already had something at the core of them anyway that they weren't trying to change.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying? So I can't
We're
base,
saying the same thing. Nafis, we're saying the same thing.
yeah,
So what?
I can't base the projection off of them. That's what I'm saying. But there
No,
are the Muslims that are trying to make the transformation. These are the ones I'm concerned with. The ones that
good.
aren't is not my concern.
But the new Muslim, this is what I'm saying, Nafis. I think
Yeah.
we're saying pretty much the same thing. The new Muslim is unable to discern at that stage. So that's why I'm saying that in embracing them, there's work they have to do. But we have to make, like our children, when we're telling our children to walk, we're not going to tell them to walk and we leave the balcony door open and there's no protective thing there. We're going to close the door. We're going to show, we're going to cushion around them and say,
make sure they don't
come
fall.
on, and start walking. And if they're going to fall, we need to be doing that and then saying, right, start taking your first steps. Don't worry. This teacher here, Ilm Mustalah Hadith, you need to learn the correct Hadith. This one here, Tawheed, go to Quran class. We're saying the same thing, but we have to put in that work because you and I and Aqil, we came in and we were exposed to certain things, and maybe our Jahiliyyah made us have a sixth sense that this doesn't sound right. And also above that, Allah's guiding us to making sure we have to say Ihdina Siratal Mustaqim at least 17 times a day. And we wanted to be guided, mashallah tabarakallah. But as you said, there are those who have evil or deviated intents in their hearts. And we know from Surah Nas that they're amongst jinn and men. The point is now, while we cannot just say, no, there's no responsibility upon the new Muslim, there is. But we've got to make sure that the environment is conducive for them. The Prophet ﷺ isn't with us anymore, but he is with his message. You're absolutely right. But we've got to make sure that the purveyors of that message make sure they're given in the right context. Remember, Yawmul Qiyamah, a non-Muslim may stand before Allah with a Muslim beside him, and before punishment is issued or whatever, and he may say, this neighbor never spoke to me about Islam, or I didn't see them practicing what they're preaching. They were beating their wives, they were horrible, they were this, they were that. Sheikh Al-Albani spoke about this. When we're saying and condemning individuals, which we shouldn't do, how certain are we that we have conveyed the message correctly? We have all these ayats in Quran about conveying the message, arguing a way that's better. We've got to make sure, how much more so must we do that with the individual who has embraced Islam? So we're saying the same thing, I believe. But I'm saying the reason I brought these contexts, because that new Muslim is being viewed by society or his community or her community in a particular way, deviance. They're moved into this direction. They come into the community and there may be some in that community, or it may be a community based on that says, this resistance now, let's take them down the road. Dar al-Harb, the government, the things that you were doing in Jahiliyyah, they're good. Distorted understandings of the ayat and the hadith saying, look, this is what it means. And making sure that those elements of legitimate deviance, which was criminality, now becomes a focus of their virtue, which it isn't, as a Muslim. We need to make sure that, again, I'm just repeating what I've just said, the environment is as conducive as can be, irrespective of what that individual has in his or her heart. But when they come in, they're under no illusion as to the context and the environment that they are coming into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me chime in here and allow me to work through my thought. I'll attempt to be as succinct as I can. The verse that you made mention of, Nafis, the last verse that you made mention of, that verse is actually speaking to the non-Muslim experience and the expectation of that experience when they embrace the faith. يُزَكِّيهِمْ وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةِ. They are to be purified and educated of the book and wisdom, right? That we can understand to mean the Sunnah. So we see here, for the person that is coming into the faith of Islam, the expectation of them as an individual and for the service provider who is servicing them is to focus on purification and education. So there is a spiritual cleansing that is meant to be taking place first as a primary. And as we are growing and cleansing our spirituality, we then come into proper education and rearing. And there's a principle that speaks to this, and it mentions التخلية قبل التحلية, that there must be a cleansing before beautification. And a very simple way to express this is, if we come into in an investment property that is somewhat dilapidated, we're going to see that it needs work. We're going to see there may be debris all over the place, whatever have you. We're not just going to roll out carpet over that and put paint on the walls, right? We're going to clean it up first. We're going to clean up the infrastructure. You're going to put a new electrical, a new plumbing, and you're going to set it up first. You're going to cleanse it, and you're going to prep it, so that now when you come into the beautification process, right? In our example here, the educational process, that the person is properly set to receive that education, to receive that beautification that is going to take place, right? So the individual that is embracing the faith, the most important thing for the individual is a focus on their spirituality, right? First, which this is expressed through our Aqidah. This is expressed through our theology, because at the core of Aqidah, it is teaching you who your Lord is and what your relationship is with your Lord. What is your place in the cosmos? How should you be thinking, right, about yourself and about that which is outside of yourself? This is what Aqidah teaches us. This is what theology brings to us, right? And thereafter, we then will focus on prayer and then actually praying. If we do these two things, then everything else will fall into its place organically, right, as necessary and as apropos. But if we put that cart before the horse and we put the other areas of the faith before spirituality and prayer, then we see things kind of fall apart for people that do that, right? Whether it's them themselves doing it, or whether it's the service providers making it that way for them. Along with this, to Dr. Baker's point, we also have the prophetic tradition that we're all aware of. Simple example of the men who had committed murder 99 times over, or as we see in the narration, 100 times over. When he got to the one that was erudite, when he got to the scholar, that scholar's advice, after telling him, firstly, your spirituality can always be improved. You're not cut off access to that. Nothing can come between you and your repentance. Nothing can come between you and Allah. He then, after that, after impressing upon his spirituality, he then focused on environment. He told him, leave the place where you were and go to a place where there's a better environment, where the soil is more fertile and conducive for where you are trying to go in your spiritual journey, right? So to the point that both of you are making, there is a focus for the individual, but also the environment has to be fertile for that individual when that individual does come forward looking to embrace the faith of Islam and looking to improve their spirituality.
Barakallahu feek. I want to put up the question, if you brothers don't mind. I think we have one, not really much of a question, but it was like a statement. I'll probably speak against it before we close out, inshallah.
Please.
MashaAllah. Jazakallah khair, Tiffany, Sister Tiffany Watson. That I'm pausing because that is some idea. MashaAllah. Allahumma barak.
Do y'all have anything to say to that, or?
I would say that would be a wonderful concept to realize and develop, because I'm not thinking about who it would comprise at this stage, but what would be the parameters for that, obviously from the Deen. And I think it should be what you were speaking to, Nafis, if I dare suggest this. It should be around the hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam and built upon that. And we know that there are religious books on that, and taking individuals and advising them around that. What is Islam? Detailing that. What is Iman as the next stage? Detailing that. What is Ihsan? Detailing that. And again, as I mentioned to you last week, all the academic frameworks and everything that I've used and developed is crowned by these things. Because if we look at Ihsan, for example, that's the epitome of being at the mature phase. Okay, when we look at Islam and how that develops, and the rudimentary to the more detailed aspects, that starts from the founding stage, the first stage, moving right across. Iman being between the adult and between the youthful adult up to the mature phase. So if a committee was formed, I think that hadith would be a good starting point, with focus upon it as we look at the individual embracing the deen. But then we would need to look at, and I ask you both this, then we would need to look at something else prophetic, and maybe Medinian society at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, where an infrastructure is put in. And so now it's not just the individual and their responsibility in growing, but the community utilizing prophetic hadith as a foundation to provide that conducive environment to that individual.
Anything you got to put towards that? Aqil?
Yeah, I'll add a couple of things to that. The first thing, I just want to thank our sister Tiffany for the value in the statement that she has presented to us. The second thing I would mention is our Sheikh and our teacher, Sheikh Salih al-Haydan, may Allah have mercy upon his soul, as he's recently passed. I want to say that this was either in the year 2008 or 2009, but I was with him both years in Mecca. I had the opportunity to spend a little bit of time with him. And we presented some of the challenges that we had in America. And one of his advices to us, and this is in 2008, 2009, was that we should begin to establish committees to address the challenges that we are having in our country with our people. That was his advice to us from back then. So I say that to say, Sister Tiffany, you're spot on, right? You're spot on. There's a statement, and it mentions good artists imitate, great artists steal. And I say this in being honest, and I have to be honest. One of the greatest service providers to new and non-Muslims that I've seen, and I don't know if there's a British chapter to this. I would love to hear if there is one. One of the greatest models that I've seen is the organization Why Islam. They have an excellent infrastructure system for non and new Muslims that I'm not going to detail out here just for the sake of time. But I say that to say we may not need to recreate the wheel. We may be able to look at what they have done successfully and build on that, and possibly institute what Nafis is saying, institute and install in that a focus on the Hadith of Jibril. But their customer relationship management system for new and non-Muslims is bar none, right? It is bar none from the experience that I've seen. And again, I don't know if there's a British chapter or British equivalent to what Why Islam has and what they've done, but it was awesome in my experience.
There is I-ERA, okay? Small I, ERA, E-R-A. My brother, Abdurrahim Green, you may know him, very well-known white convert, mashallah, established in the Dawah for 3 or more decades, mashallah. He's at the helm of that. And they traverse everywhere. They've gone into the Amazon rainforest, and we've seen shahadas of villages and everything like that. So I would say, suggest that may be the equivalent to what you're discussing. But one of the things, I'm going to throw this out there because it started from your side of the waters, if we like. We're both speaking now again about that provision of a new Muslim coming in, taking Shahada. But where is that infrastructure that takes them all the way through and that is there paying attention to them? They can embrace the deen with these organizations. They will facilitate them with the basics of Islam, talking about the Hadith of Jibreel again. Now I'm coming back to what about the other aspect where there's the macro context of the community being equipped to be able to facilitate and deal with that new Muslim as they go through those pillars and learn about the deen. And we have, and I'm not saying this as an example, but I've spoken with many American brothers, and when we were together, Brother Aqil, those years ago, there's a big discussion with the wider community of brothers who attended the conference and everything. I didn't know and fully appreciate the impact of the social program of the Nation of Islam, and why so many found it difficult to leave that that program or that infrastructure, until I came to the States on the last journey that I had, and I actually spoke to ex-Nation of Islam, descendants of parents who were Nation of Islam. And I will say this, and I'm not saying we look at that or go back to that or Nation of Islam. We know they're upon disbelief. We know everything. We don't need to go down that road. But when I realized from that context, from the American brothers as well and sisters, and when I've looked at it academically, that there's never been the like of that infrastructure built amongst black people since that time that was as effective. We saw other derivations within the Sunnah amongst the Salafi community, and I speak to Abu Muslima, and I know him, mashallah, tabarakallah, and the community and what happened there. And I don't know the ins and outs, but I saw that the interference from outside, from scholars who were being petitioned by individuals who sought to destroy that community, meant that that was short-lived. Put that to the side, and you will know better than that and can speak better to that than I can.
Yeah,
but when we're looking from within the Sunnah, when we're looking Sunni Islam, when we're looking at black Muslims, white Muslims, I am yet to see an infrastructure that embraces that Medinian concept initially when the Sahaba, the Quraysh, them from the Quraysh went over and were embraced by the Ansar according to this brotherhood that the Prophet ﷺ established initially. I'm yet to see something that provides, again, socio-economic, socio-cultural, socio-religious, this time empowerment because of their infrastructure. So those two organizations we referred to, all well and good, but from a community perspective, where is that infrastructure that embraces conducive environment, everything?
I believe there are small pockets of it. It's not on a large scale, but I do believe that there are some small pockets. And I believe that what you're looking for is pretty much, that was the role of the masjid, to be honest with you. Everything you're saying was the role of the masjid.
Very true. Very true.
Brotherhood and sisterhood also plays and define that role, to be that supportive aid and things like that. Not like a monitoring thing, but as long as the brotherhood is strong, is strengthened, and the sisterhood is strengthened, that's supposed to do that. One thing I do want to mention, and I don't want to be a person to stick this at you, Aqil, but I have to say it because you brought out a beautiful point as far as with the hadith of the man that killed 99 men. You notice how even in that whole situation, it still was the responsibility of the person. You ever notice even in the ayat and sort of to Ankabut, Allah Jalla wa'ala talks about if the earth being spacious enough. So if you can't practice in one, you go to another. Even in Surah An-Nisa, Allah says the same thing. He still placed the responsibility on the person, not the service provider. Notice, not even on the people that supposed to provide. Why is I'm making this a big deal for me? Because I think if we keep removing that responsibility from the people, it becomes a problem. You understand? You remember, you're taking this journey yourself. This is an individual choice on your own. Yes, the brotherhood, the sisterhood, collectively supposed to give you that support you need. The masjid is supposed to give you that service providing you need. You understand? Your imam, your spiritual guide, etc., etc. But you, the person who's driving the vehicle, still supposed to have some responsibility. And I think if we come into Islam not with that understanding, and this is not just for new Muslims, Brother Haq. I wanted to make this clear.
True.
This is for this, because a new Muslim to me, period. This is for any Muslim. This is for any Muslim who has not been practicing Islam. You could have been in Islam for 20 years, but you haven't been practicing Islam for that whole 20 years. You only probably been practicing for 5 years. 15 years you haven't. You're still relatively new.
Right.
You understand? So this is for anyone who hasn't really been practicing Islam, but relatively has been practicing Islam. So my thing is, we should define that responsibility. you need to realize
No
that
one's saying no to that, though. Brother Nafis, I
Yeah.
think we've agreed that responsibility is upon the individual because they are taking that shahada. I don't think there's any. But what I'm saying is that we need to now start discussing these two in equilibria, because one is always discussed to the detriment of the other. You said something beautiful there. Yes, the masajid. I know the Brixton community. That we know many communities in America have tried to emulate to varying degrees that Medinian construct. But the point I'm making, why did I refer to the Nation of Islam? They had chapters all over the country, and there was a consistency and uniformity there. Why have we, as Muslims who are upon the Sunnah, not been able to achieve that? Once that's done,
they had a nice rollout plan. They did. They really did have a nice rollout plan.
So,
you know
so
especially about cleaning the people up from drugs, and
right,
then putting them onto a nice social thing. They did. I mean,
right.
I can't lie. They had a nice rollout plan.
So what you're saying is, I think Brother Aqil encapsulated both of what we were saying beautifully before you put up Sister Tiffany's statement, mashallah, her query. And again, it's got to be intertwined. It's got to be the equilibria. No, we're not saying the responsibility of the Shah, because some had, like you said, Brother Nafis, some will come and say, oh, I left Islam or I stopped practicing because the community. No, you this is upon you. The community could have been the best in the world. It could have been the worst in the world. But what were you doing for yourself? What were you learning for yourself? I'm with you on all of that. But then it cannot be, because we've seen this, and we've seen it from, I call them the cult. We've seen it from cults. We've seen it from other very dogged Muslims that, they went astray and they left the deen because of what was in their heart. And they exonerate themselves as a community that they had any complicity in that at all. No, you contributed. You directed them in an area or a way which was wrong. You presented them to aspects of Islam in a distorted manner. So what I'm saying is, you've got both sides. That individual can't blame the community, carte blanche, but the community can't say, no, we are the righteous. This individual was revealed. His hal became clear. Her hal became clear, because that's happening a lot. And then what you see is this group think. And what happens? Anyone who doesn't fit with that group think is then cast out, and they wait for that person to come off the deen, to make mistakes. And then they applaud each other like, we saw this in this individual already. Both are wrong. There needs to be, again, that key word, an equilibrium between the two, the focus on the two.
No, we got to wrap up. Alhamdulillah. We actually went over an hour. Jazakallah khair. Oh, okay. Somebody just put up another statement I just share with you guys, but we got to fall back, inshallah ta'ala. No, not that. That's not the one. It's this one she showed.
Good place to conclude. I think that statement by Abdulaziz is a nice wrap around of everything we've discussed.
That's it.
And inshallah ta'ala, just stay tuned for next week, inshallah ta'ala. Like I said, we do have the Q&A WhatsApp, Fajr WhatsApp Q&A. If anything you have to say about this episode, or any suggestion you have for any upcoming episodes or discussions that you want to be talked about, you can reach me or either of my other two co-hosts, and I'm pretty sure one of them will respond back to you, and we can see if we can make that possibly happen. Thank you guys for tuning in to the Fajr Club. Again, like I said, we're just trying to build with these discussions. Hopefully we can take them back respectively to those communities that have masajids or have organizations that can probably take from this and start employing something and coming up with something similar to why Islam, not rewritten the will, something like, I think it was called IRAS or IRA or something like that. IRAS, yeah. And something like that we can use and employ, inshallah. And it's always good to learn from my fellow co-hosts, Aqil and brother Dr. Duhak Baker. Like we said, this is a beautiful discussion, something to have, inshallah. Anything y'all have to say before we close out, brothers?
No, nothing from me.
Neither from me.
All right, this is your brother Nafis Abu Zaid.
This is your brother Aqil Ingram.
This is your brother Abdul Haq Baker.
And thank you for tuning into the Fajr Club. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.